Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. The war on Christmas isn't real, and if it were, by how people choose to identify it or take issue with it, then capitalism is to blame, not some kind of grand deep state conspiracy or anything like that. So let's explain, shall we? Right, so I already started to touch on this a bit in the last video, but there's a very clear disconnect between baby Jesus, Mother Mary, and Joseph, and the Star of Bethlehem in a manger in a desert in the Middle East, with three wise men showing up in robes on camels to visit other people and shepherds in Middle Eastern robes, not a speck of snow in sight. So why all this stuff, right? I explained that in the last video. It has to do with Yuletide, and the general celebrations are kind of a corruption of Saturnalia to an extent. But let's talk about Christmas traditions and how they began to expand over time. Now, Christmas traditions vary naturally across many different nations because Christianity is now a global religion. It's on basically every single continent on Earth. So the religions and the traditional Christmas foods are very varied. So I don't want to get into that. What I want to get into is how this notion of a war on Christmas arises. So a little historical context. Our Christmas traditions, as we know them in the West, in terms of a Christmas tree with decorations, lights on the Christmas tree. They were originally candles before we had like electric lights. And with, deck the halls with boughs of holly and all these sort of northern wintry aesthetics and candy canes and things like that. These traditions have Germanic roots. In fact, here in Canada, the earliest Christmas traditions as we know them today were brought by German mercenaries serving in the British Empire. And when they were here, of course, they shared their culture, their food, their customs, their celebrations. And this is how we get the first sort of, put a pine tree in your living room and decorate it. That's an imported German tradition. Or Germanic in general, like it's common from Germany, Scandinavia, that area. Now, with that in mind, this then brings us to, what were traditional Christmas celebrations like? Very dull and boring, actually. Usually on Christmas Eve, things would be very quiet, and then people would go to midnight mass, because midnight, I believe, is the celebration of the liturgical day. And so that's why on Christmas Eve, things kind of, peter out and you're not supposed to work. And then you go to midnight mass, then everyone comes back, they go to sleep, and then they wake up the next morning and they have a day off and they celebrate the birth of Jesus. And it's all this sort of wonderful, feel-good, cozy stuff, right? So in terms of your classic Christmas tradition, it's that. So how did we get gift giving, holly, big feasts, things like that? Again, thank you, Yule and Saturnalia. So this then brings us to the war on Christmas. And note how the people who talk about a war on Christmas, it's about fighting to preserve the Christmas that we know today. It's about this, right? And oh no, people, what's the big one, right? People want to take down the manger in front of a church. Oh no, the war on Christmas must end. That one of, trying to get a church to not put out a manger scene, that does strike me personally as very silly. The other big point that people will point to, and this is the one I definitely take issue with, is the whole Merry Christmas versus Happy Holidays. Now here's the thing. Around this time of year, because again, winter solstice, there are numerous festivals and holidays. Sometimes Ramadan and Hanukkah are close to this. Other times only Hanukkah is close. Other times you have things like Kwanzaa, Hindu festivals. You have Chinese festivals and various regional African festivals and classic European festivals from pagan times. The notion of winter being a holiday season is not new So there's not really a war going on against Christmas. It's merely asking people who observe Christmas to recognize, hey, by the way, you're just not the only one, which is true. And in terms of traditional Christianity and trying to stop the war on Christmas, no one's saying you can't celebrate. There aren't cops breaking down your door for putting up a Christmas tree, which is, again, an imported and co-opted pagan tradition. No one is saying you can't give Christmas gifts and say Merry Christmas in the comfort of your own home with your friends, your family. Again, I work as a courier. I've had a mix of Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Either one I'm perfectly fine with. This notion of there being a war on Christmas, somehow a war on the birth of Jesus, which again is the religion that the vast majority of Americans celebrate and claim to observe, and in some cases want even more, state enforcement of. It's not really a thing. The war on Christmas is something that has been used by right-wing media to drum up a frenzy and politicize a religious time of year to try and present a culture war, despite Christmas having already been a part of various culture wars, which is why we have this weird mishmash of, oh yeah, look at this beautiful manger scene, which is straight out of the Middle East with ho 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 and Santa hats and hot chocolate and candy canes and gingerbread men and all these delightfully non-Middle Eastern things. If anything, it's almost like maybe there was a war on Christmas in the past, and the Christians won that war, which is why it's still around. But it came at the cost of compromise, of co-opting various pagan traditions and aesthetics. And that's why we have this. But no one wants to talk about that. No one who talks about a war on Christmas wants to actually sit back and really think, is Christmas under threat? Have I really been limited in my ability, pandemic accepted, of course, have I really been limited in my ability to gather with friends and choose to celebrate the birth of Christ in whatever manner I see fit? But then, is it even about Christ anymore? As I pointed out earlier, for many, Christmas has now become a very sort of irreligious holiday of sorts. It's more about the spirit of the season, right? Happy holidays and Yuletide greetings and all this sort of Christmas stuff without it necessarily having to be about Jesus. What part of Jesus has to do with Santa Claus coming down the chimney and leaving gifts for boys and girls under a pine tree in the snow in a northern hemisphere country? What? What part of what we identify and what the Hallmark Channel peddles as peak American Christmas, what part of that actually has to do with the birth of an extreme radical who loved whores and loved the poor? What part of the war on Christmas falls into that category or falls neatly into that space that has been cleaved out as a part of the culture wars in the West right now? I would really love to know, because frankly, I don't see it anywhere. And that's the thing. That's the root of what's bothering me today. That it's not about the war on Christmas per se. It's about the war on the conservative ideal of Christmas and how it is celebrated, which, if you look at just the main aesthetics and the core concepts to these people, like how, what's-her-face, Megyn Kelly said, no, don't worry, kids, Santa Claus is white on Fox News a few years ago. That was about the aesthetics and, that's terrible about Christmas, and not about Jesus. Not about the man people, allegedly love in places like America and Europe and Australia, New Zealand and Canada. This is why the war on Christmas is a farcical idea that needs to die. It's not real. And the idea that it is, and that it will continue to plague us likely for years to come before people start really evaluating this is definitely what's bothering me today.